Okay, in this here lesson I'm going to go over how to create a simple material within Unreal 4. You might have seen videos before where you can right click here and create a material, name it, and then drag and drop in your textures. If you're modeling in a software package such as Maya or 3ds Max, I've got a barrel here that I've done in Maya and I've textured it through Photoshop. You can actually export this as FBX and it will actually carry across in the Unreal 4 your material and also the textures that are embedded in that shader. So if I click on this here barrel and look over to my attributes, I've got and I've renamed my Phong barrel underscore matte because the name also carries over. I've added in a color texture. I've also added in a normal map and I've also added in a specular map. So to export this out, well, first of all I want to set my pivot point because as you might know, Unreal 4 takes a pivot point from the center of your scene. What I usually do first is I grab my snap to point. In Maya I hold down D and I snap it somewhere helpful inside my barrel. I'm snapping it to this middle point, so when I take this eventually in the Unreal and I want to scale it or resize it, it's not going to go through my floor and it's going to be easier to place as well. So once I've moved my pivot point to that area, I am now going to turn that off. I'm going to snap to grid and I'm basically going to snap it to the center of my grid. I might need just to come in here for a second. Press 4 and there we go. So once that's in place, all I'm going to do is go File, Export Selection, choose FBX Export. I'm going to just do this to my desktop. And for Maya, you want to make sure in the geometry section you've got smoothing groups, referenced asset content, and triangulate. And I'm going to name this barrel, and I'll just call it mesh. And I'll export selection. So once that's done, we just come over to Unreal 4. I've made up a folder here and I'm just going to import my barrel into that. So I'm just going to open that up. What you want to make sure in the import options is that you have import materials and import textures ticked, and then just select import all. So this will take over first of all your mesh, your textures, and will also make a material and apply that material to your static mesh. So you can see here I've got my color texture, my normal map, and my specular map. It's made a material for me, and I can see already that it's also applied that to my barrel. So if I drag and drop that into my scene, just make it slightly bigger, we can see that it is applied already to my barrel. In the material, so if I double click this, it opens up the material editor within Unreal 4. Over on the right hand side you've got what's known as the palette, so these have all the expressions that you can use in your material. In the bottom left has the details for your material or any other expressions that you have selected. In the top left here we have basically our viewport, which kind of gives us a very good idea of what our material is going to look like. We can switch this between a cylinder, sphere, plane, cube, and it also has a teapot here, which basically lets me, if I have my static mesh selected in my content browser, I can click on the teapot and it will also change the model in here to that, which is very, very handy. So I'm just going to bring these back over here. This shader has a lot of nodes attached to it. A lot of them I'm going to cover in later lessons. For now we're just going to focus on a few adjustments that we can make with these textures. For instance, in the normal map we can actually adjust the intensity of that through the actual material editor. So if I hold M and click in my viewport, and if I hold 3 and click, I get a multiply when I'm holding M, and I get a 3 constant 3 vector when I hold 3. Basically what I can do is I can multiply the values that are contained inside this image by the numbers that I have in this constant 3 vector. So basically I can up or lower the intensity of my normal map through that. So for instance, I'm just going to click on this drop down to get a preview of what I'm doing here. So I'm going to drag my top node into the A multiply, and then I'm going to drag my constant, or my 3 constant, into the B. And you can see now I've got 3 zeros in my constant, so it's multiplying 0 by whatever values are contained in this texture, which is bringing back a black image, basically, because if you multiply anything by 0, it comes back as 0, which is black. So what I can do is, in my constant 3 vector, is change my blue value to 1. You can see now that this will change to blue. And then if I have something that's lower than 1 on my red and green, it will be less intense than my default normal map here. And if I have anything above 1, it's going to be more intense than my default normal map. So for instance, if I put in 10 by 10, we should be able to see in our multiply the kind of preview that we're going to get from that, and it's far more intense than our actual normal map that we imported in. So for instance, if we look at our barrel here, and if I switch between our normal map to our multiply, you can see that the normal map is definitely far too intense. But you can make small adjustments to that. So if I come over here, instead of having 10, I'll go 2 by 2. Now you can see that it's twice as intense, and I can go, if I wanted to, 0.5 by 0.5, and it's half as intense as it would be if I had just plugged in my normal map. I can also use this for my color map. So if I hold M and I click on my viewport, and again if I hold down 3 and click, I can plug in my color one, and I can also plug in my 3 or my constant 3 vector, and basically I can adjust the red, green and values of this color texture and multiply them together. So if I go to my constant 3 vector and I put say 3 in for red and 1 in for green and 1 in for blue, you'll notice over here that it's got a red tinge now to my color texture. If I click or drag that into my base color, you'll see my barrel's kind of more I suppose red than it is blue now, and I can adjust that even further by getting the blue and maybe going 0.5, and my red one I'll put that up to 5, and maybe my green I'll put to 0.7. So again, we've got a red barrel now rather than a blue barrel. So instead of taking in an extra texture or anything like that, you can adjust them in here, and it's less intensive on your RAM, I suppose, because you're not having that many assets as you would have if you've taken in more textures. And again, we can do that with the intensity of our specular map, so we can make it more shiny or less shiny depending on what we're multiplying it by.